Fantastic. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Take my clicker. First, let me thank all of you again for coming to join us here in Naples. I know these are big investments in your time and our time, but we see tremendous value in these engagements. Now, as Dave said, while I'm here to talk about cloud services and infrastructure, I actually want to start at the business discussion. I tell every client I talk to, and those of you who've talked to me here probably heard me say this, cloud has to start as a business discussion with an agility dimension. That is, what problem are you trying to solve, and what is it that cloud does that allows you to move faster than you can do, or do things that are not possible in the other world. So we had recently an announcement and an alliance with the Weather Channel. You've heard it mentioned here a few times. This is huge in and of itself, just as a competitive posture for us, as a growth, us as a partner for the Weather Channel. But I want to play a video and then drill down into how this leverages our hybrid portfolio to realize business transformation. So go ahead with the video.
Weather forecast shapes so many aspects of our lives. Its ripple effect impacts every corner of the economy. It leads to transportation delays, insurance claims, and problems with crop yields. But it can also lead to sales. Weather is a huge variable for business performance and one of the largest big data challenges businesses face today. Now, the Weather Company and IBM are partnering to help businesses take advantage of weather's ups and downs. With data from WSI, the professional division of the Weather Company, and IBM's analytics, expertise, and cloud computing, businesses in every industry can make better decisions based on data insight. And the data insight is coming from everywhere, across the Internet of Things, in weather sensors, smartphones, cars, and planes. Analyzing sales data and long-range forecasts can help retailers decide what to sell, when, and where. Insurers can now look at weather data, plus policyholder data, and warn customers before a storm to stay safe and take steps to prevent property damage. Analyzing weather data and energy consumption data can help keep the lights on without wasting power or dollars. The weather might be uncontrollable, but businesses can control how they prepare and respond to weather patterns. With IBM and the Weather Company, weather means business.
All right, so I apologize up front for the analogy, but cloud, data, analytics, Internet of Things, all these wonderful ill-defined terms that we all wrestle around with, it is in fact the perfect storm, if you will, for what is going on in the world around us. So there's the analogy, we'll get out there. Peace. So now when I talk about cloud again, once I get below the business side, so the business problem is how do you use insights, how do you use this capability and use it to drive your business? What are we in fact doing? The cloud in my mind is separating what from how. You shouldn't have to worry about how, I'll get into that because it inherits properties or lifts properties up into the capability. But the first side of this, of course, is an Internet of Things thought. The Weather Channel has hundreds of thousands of sensors and devices and capabilities all around the globe. All of that information is collected. They collect it globally. They analyze it for their purposes. They create the insights, and they expose that insight through a series of APIs. So that is their piece of this, a huge piece of this, is the insights and the value and the capability and the accuracy and the collection of that data and the presentation through APIs to the world, if you will. And there are many, many businesses that access that directly. The second piece, and you've heard us talk about Bluemix, you've heard us talk about the integration, is having the capability as a business through our services to take those APIs, integrate them into an application, whether it be a mobile application, integrate them with your backend services, bring your services or your capability that you're trying to bring together with that data into a single environment, and do that integration easily, do it at cloud speed, do it through APIs. That's the second piece of the what. You're taking this data, bringing it in, mixing it with your data. And finally, the analytics dimension. There is, of course, the analytics on the Weather Channel's side for what they're trying to do in a real-time basis. There's the analytics that you would bring to the table. There's the analytics that we, IBM, might bring to the table. So come back to this thought of mixing all those capabilities. Having the capability of Watson, the insights into an industry, the insights into the impact of weather and weather dynamics or other sources, I'm using weather as the example, and then integrating that and having the ability on a real-time basis through our services to scale the analytics side of that equation. That is the mix of what's going on in this example. That is a cloud agility dimension across the IoT side, the integration side, and of course, the analytics side of that equation. If you drip down a lower layer, you've heard us talk about our things. I mean, the blessing and curse of IBM is the breadth of our portfolio. If you try to talk to all of it at one time, you're probably going to confuse an audience. You confuse ourselves. On the other hand, the power of that is the ability to realize what I just talked about. So let me start in the middle. That IoT example, what we do with the weather channel, how we collect all of that data. SoftLayer is a global platform. It is globally distributed. It's on a global network. It's secure. All of the attributes that we've been talking about can be realized there to both deploy, collect, analyze locally, aggregate globally, and create the insights from that set of capabilities. Again, I'm using the Weather Channel example, but many of you have equivalent examples. We work with industrial concerns, power and generation concerns, even in engagement, if you're getting insight from your sensors, which may be retail distribution networks, globally distributed, all of that, you now have a global platform on which to collect, control, and aggregate that information. The Bluemix side, I alluded to this earlier. We talk a lot about this. Bluemix is a couple of different, many different things, but one is, it is the blend of our capabilities, Blue, and Angel alluded to this a little earlier, and the innovation that is the cloud world outside of IBM. That's the mix element of this. And so what we're doing here, you're seeing the value that we have for the analytics, the tools that we provide to simplify that integration that I just described, the ability for any client or partner to expose their capabilities via APIs consistent with the Cloud Foundry framework and make that integration possible. So this is creating the next generation application, creating that next generation insight, in doing so with a level of productivity and developer productivity that is unparalleled, and that's really the magic, if you will, of the cloud journey. And then the third piece, again, now we're down to the analytics, is having the visibility, control, and security to allow you to run a business critical application or make critical decisions knowing that you can trust that infrastructure. That's an inherited attribute of the IBM Cloud. And also having the industry breadth. When we talk about building a new application based on these insights, doing so with our partners in global business services that have deep understanding of the industry and the applications of that industry and bringing that all together. That is what we mean when we talk about the IBM Cloud. It is that infrastructure element, it's that integration capability, and it's all the rest of the expertise that surrounds us in the IBM company and in the world around us. Now, crawl down into the infrastructure, and those of you that know me, hopefully I won't go too far down on this path, but the infrastructure, we've used the phrase for years. In fact, I think Tom uses this quite a bit, infrastructure matters. In the services world, that is still true. When someone asked me a question earlier today, if you're really committed to these open standards, what's your play? How do you stay relevant in that world? I said, number one, we have to do that for enterprises, but we need to create, and we do create services that are differentiated in the database attribute, in the simplicity of integration, in the quality or the performance of the messaging service, whatever it may be, and those capabilities inherit that underlying capability from the infrastructure. So we'll talk about performance and the ability to tune the performance. You don't have to give up control and insight and awareness of performance in moving to a cloud service. You don't have to, it's clear everyone talks about scalability, and we often talk about what I would say local scalability. In our world, we have a concept of global scalability, so we reach every country, every geography in the world. We provide a enterprise, particularly multinationals, the ability to do that in a consistent fashion, but have that scale in whatever dimension matters. Could be vertically for performance, it could be globally for scale, it could be in a given country on a dynamic basis. All of that scalability dimension is fundamental to the cloud attributes and the agility. And finally, this idea of control. Again, Robert touched on this, the idea that we can see and have visibility and control into the infrastructure. And you'll hear us talk about SoftLayer and talk about APIs and access. Think of that as an information source of visibility. Our view of the cloud services world is that the client should have as much visibility, insight, and control, if not more, in that cloud services world than what they had before in their own infrastructure world. So those are the core attributes and awareness. You saw a version of this from Robert. I'll just go a little bit deeper. We talk about the IBM Cloud as a single thing. The idea that you would move your business to the cloud as a singular statement is irrational. Well, what was Jim talking about? How do you say it's a single IBM cloud, but that's irrational to move? We support a multitude of workloads and data types and capabilities in a single globally connected cloud infrastructure. We're building it that way for a reason. We are building it that way so that we can be in every country, every geography, every location that matters from a compliance and regulatory standpoint. So you'll see us have multiple sites in Canada. They care. We'll have multiple sites in Australia. They care. We, of course, have multiple in the US, multiple in the EU. In countries that are particularly regulated, say Germany or the UK, we will ultimately have multiple sites in those countries. That is so that we can provide companies and enterprises the flexibility to meet data residency, privacy, and control laws in whatever combination of environments they work. We can do that in a distributed model because both in all of that infrastructure is globally managed. When we introduce a data center in a country, and we don't normally share all the numbers here, 20,000 devices have less than an incremental 10 person headcount labor attribute. So as we're scaling hundreds of thousands of devices, it has a very small impact on the overall operational cost because everything across the infrastructure is automated, both at the infrastructure level and at the managed service level. I'll talk a bit more about the OpenStack. You heard Angel talk through how important OpenStack, Cloud Foundry, and Docker is. I'll touch on that in a moment, I think on the next slide. But we also have the flexibility. We have flexibility to run vertical scaled workloads. Again, single platform, but the ability to work on an x86 world in either a scale-up model or a scale-out, to work with traditional SAN, to work with file and object-based storage, to work in our power systems. We have global infrastructure deployed for our AIX systems, and we're deploying global infrastructure for Power Linux in SoftLayer. We support and all of this connected globally, again, with a network, and this is unique. All the other cloud service providers, I'll name the major ones that we talk about, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, do not own their overall transport globally. They do not run and manage that transport globally, and there's both an economic impact to that, and there's a control and visibility. Yes, telcos run their global networks. Most of them don't actually operate truly in all geos. They do the same thing we do. SoftLayer is larger than a tier 2 telco in and of itself. We're nearly a tier 1 size. Our bandwidth, the backbone is nearly 45–50% the size of AT&T's backbone. That is made available to you to connect all of this and manage and manipulate that. So tremendous level of infrastructure differentiation. Not that we need to talk about, but the workload, go back to the analytics. If your analytics needs a very highly vertically scaled broad bandwidth connection in a very large database, we have that capability. If you're trying to do this in a global scale, you do that. So the point is to have the flexibility and choice in a single platform. So I've talked about the bottom and the platform. I do want to sort of emphasize, without getting dragged down into the overall detail, some points that both Robert and Angel made. So one, we embrace hybrid. We are convinced for enterprises the world will be hybrid for essentially the foreseeable future. To us, that means that as we create our service capability, we need to support 3 models consistently. One is a shared or public access point. The second is a dedicated. So all the services we have that matter, for clients that need that dedicated to their single purpose, we can deploy in a dedicated fashion in one of our data centers, but with a security model that's unique to that enterprise. And the third is what we call local. Robert introduced this underneath Bluemix. We would have the ability to have a local or a remote managed implementation on the client site. So that's true at Bluemix, shared, access directly, dedicated, built for a client in SoftLayer, local, deployed and managed on-premise or in one of our data centers on behalf of a client. You have different balances of flexibility, scalability, but consistency across that pattern. Same thing for OpenStack. So OpenStack, we have shared OpenStack. We are moving to have all of SoftLayer accessible. That's available in beta now. We have a managed, dedicated OpenStack environment, again, deployed for a client where they need it. And the third, you would have a local implementation. So we can deploy an OpenStack setup locally for a client. So this idea of shared, dedicated, and local across all of our portfolio is how we provide the consistency. Which combinations make sense to the client? That's a choice they'll make over many years or change it every year. We've talked about the dynamicism. That's key. The second point, and again, Angel talked on this, but I want to emphasize it. We don't just talk about open source. We strategically plan and invest to make it real. 3.5 years ago, roughly, Angel talked about approaching Rackspace. OpenStack was a great standard. We knew we needed one. It was controlled by a single company. Will you create a governance, input, governance, and output to make it a true standard? Yes or no? Yes, we created the OpenStack Foundation. We participate along with a lot of other companies, and now we have hundreds, I think it's 400 to 500 IBMers investing on a continuous basis to harden that. But we will use the standard OpenStack distributions. We don't fork the code. We don't change it. So it's a deeper commitment than just the words. It's the model, the investment, the enhancements, and the deployment. Same thing with Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry is the underpinning of our Bluemix capability from an open source standpoint. We approached Pivotal, probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Do you recognize for this to become a standard, we need input, governance, output? Yes. And the Cloud Foundry Foundation, which Angel alluded to, was created in February of last year when we announced Bluemix. So again, one of the different, we see that as critical to enterprise-grade infrastructure utilization at whatever level you absorb. And finally, when I talk about managed services, again, this is a choice. We support 3 models. Self-managed, there are times, when you want the employees, when you want the development team, when you want parts of your company, or if you are a small company, total self-managed, self-directed, discovery, purchase, use. There's a level of this that can be done through and by the application. So if you think about what Bluemix does, it's a complete DevOps lifecycle. If you create an application in that environment, it brings with it all of the management tools and capabilities. So that's what we would talk about as application managed, or managed in the context of the application that was created with the services. And then the third would be a choice to have IBM manage the infrastructure on your behalf. And again, these are not, they're not mutually exclusive choices. You're going to have an enterprise that has an element of their infrastructure run and managed by IBM, other elements which we might manage the stability of the underlying OpenStack environment, but everything within that is self-serve within the context of the client. So again, that's the model of what we're trying to develop and deploy, again, for enterprise adoption at a broad scale of cloud. That comes down into these attributes. Again, the fact that we have that choice, I talked about some of the elements of that, allows us to take what in most cloud infrastructure in a 24/7 workload, and when you move that into the IBM capability, see anywhere from 30 to 50% TCO advantage, anywhere from 2 to 4x performance advantages. There are very real advantages, all driven by API, all consumptive billing, all in the cloud model, controlled by all the things I've been talking about. You get very real benefits end-to-end for different workloads leveraging those capabilities. The scalability I already talked about. There's another element to that, which is, people talk about the scalability. I can find any cloud provider who does that for me. The fact that we, again, offer a choice of working in a shared environment or a dedicated environment in the cloud model allows clients not just the performance dimension that I was talking about, but also the security model. If extending into the shared world and the economic and scalability and the virtualization benefits matter, that's fine. You can apply a class of your workloads to that world. If that is too restrictive to the security model for the workload of interest, we can work in a dedicated model as well. So you get the scalability in what I used to talk about as cloud without compromise. You don't have to sacrifice those capabilities if they are important to that element of your business. And that's really a key here, is that we are no longer talking about dabbling. Clients, there's two fundamental, and I think Irene talked about this a bit in her analysis. 3-4 years ago, cloud was all about cost, and security was a reason not to move. Now, cloud is a business agility discussion. Quite frankly, the IT side doesn't matter that much. Chips and bits are all the same. We all buy them from the same place. It's what you don't do. That's where the real benefit is. If you dip your toe in the water, you still have to do all the stuff you did before. If you move 70, 80, 90% into the services world, you can actually eliminate entire business processes in your business. That's where the real savings come, and you see a much more profound shift. And correlated to that, or related to that, is the security discussion has moved from the reason not to move to an engineering problem to be solved. And again, I often go through the example, in our IBM world, bane of my existence is a principle or a security policy called ITSC 104. If I applied ITSC 104 to moving IBM workloads into software, I would fail 40 of 100 counts. Holy, what are you talking about, Jim? You just told me this is a great thing. Here's the problem. That policy isn't a policy, it's an implementation. It was very prescriptive. When we step back and rewrite that as a policy that recognizes the capability of the cloud world and the different ways in which you can enforce a security policy, actually all 40 of those quote-unquote failures are stronger in the cloud services model because you have more visibility, more control, and more access. So the point there, again, I see a lot of enterprises go through this. They say, well, until it looks and smells and feels like what I've done for the last 10 years, I can't accept it. Well, the answer is, step back. What are you trying to do? What's the business agility? What's the real policy? How would you enforce that in this new world? And that's where the magic comes in, and that's where you actually eliminate the capabilities. So all these attributes matter, is kind of the point I was on there. Wrap up this section, and then we'll move into listening to a client talk about this. This idea that it is unparalleled in the scope and reach, but uncompromising, I think is fundamental. When you start to realize the path by which enterprises can get all these benefits, it's envisioning what is it that the business requires. Again, my first statement, it's a business problem with an agility dimension. How do you solve that? How do we build for that problem? Which choice of deployment models, shared, dedicated, local, makes sense for our enterprise and for our problem? How do we want to manage that? Do I manage it myself? Do I really want all of that complexity? Do I want teams to have that flexibility, or do I want it managed on my behalf, or whatever combination? And finally, that mix, that hybrid world of leveraging the infrastructure, understanding that it's a different world, that is where you transform the business. And I'll leave one more kind of example from our IBM journey. We've had many debates in IBM on this topic, as you can imagine. Is it the same rate and pace of IT evolution in the last 20 years, or something bigger and faster, it being cloud? Is it a natural extension of our current capabilities, hardware, software, and services, or something very different where I have to step back and rethink it? And will I learn everything that I need to learn as an extension of my private cloud virtualization journey? If you think it's slow, the normal rate and pace, natural extension, and I'm already doing everything, I would assert you're wrong. If you realize it's much bigger and faster, you need to step back further, and the virtualization journey is a subset of the totality of what has to be done in cloud. Then you take a very different approach, and you move with a different level of speed and urgency, and that is why we created the IBM Cloud Unit that Robert talked to. This, I've touched on a couple. We are doing this and seeing this with clients in every industry. I'm sure that you probably represent that same spectrum. Financial services have been viewed as the last. I won't move, I can't do it. Boursorama Bank is one of the fastest growing online banks in Europe. They're a subset of Societe Generale. They are building out their entire online banking system in software, multiple data centers, highly resilient infrastructure with a strong security model. Financial institutions will move. Consumer and retail, I'll use the Toshiba example here. Toshiba, it was actually a spin-off of a company into Toshiba, wanted to be pure cloud. They have a massive Oracle database. I hate to mention that here, but that's what it is. The Oracle database on our cloud infrastructure, and then they use software to have satellite retail store in a box. All of their engagement, all of their sales force, everything is engaged, distributed globally through software. They have the local interaction, local performance, local system of engagement, aggregate all the data into a centrally run data, all on the cloud infrastructure story that I showed you earlier. Healthcare and life sciences, compliance, one of the, again, last people to move. I didn't know this when I started working with some of these clients. There's almost 100 hours of labor associated with every server activation, deactivation in a GXP compliant world. Somebody has to go look up all the information, collect the information, document the report, verify it's all correct. We are doing the automations in the software world to use the APIs to collect all that information in real time. So you activate the server with the appropriate approvals. The PDF report for the regulators is generated in 5 minutes. 100 hours of savings per event because they figured out how to automate around that world. That's how compelling this can be. Again, if you rethink how you run your processes, and again, energy and utilities, same story.